Welcome to the CondoVultures.com podcast with your host, Peter Zalewski, a Miami real estate broker, Wall Street consultant, and expert witness. This podcast is focused on identifying real estate buying opportunities in the South Florida condo market of Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. The CondoVultures.com podcast is not authorized by the South Florida real estate industry and will most likely annoy many of the region's talking heads. This podcast will feature straight talk and salty language that could be offensive to some. Please remember that past investment success does not determine future gains, especially in South Florida's volatile condo market. For more information, please visit CondoVultures.com. Don't buy a South Florida condo, discounted or distressed, before taking a Condo Vultures correction tour. CondoVultures.com offers weekly bus and walking tours that focus on educating buyers on the how-tos of identifying discounted condos, analyzing the opportunities, and purchasing units. Every tour attendee receives a list of all condo projects in a particular market, a market assessment handout, and unmatched expert analysis. For more information on the condo correction tours, please visit condovultures.eventbrite.com.
This is Peter Zalewski of the Condo Vultures podcast. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. And I wanted to alert you that if you have a property that you're looking to sell in the Tri-County, South Florida area, I would encourage you to reach out to Jenny Cortez, a licensed real estate broker with cvrrealty.com. She's my partner. She's been in the business for north of 15 years. More importantly, she knows the market. She knows how to get a deal done. And she also realizes that it's more important to get a price that you can accept and sell the property rather than to hold firm on some price that's never going to be achieved and ultimately languish on the market. So if you're looking to do a deal that you want a skilled expert who can help you sell a property, reach out to Jenny Cortez at 305-865-5859, 305-865-5859, or visit her website, cvrrealty.com.
Welcome to Miami Reporters Roundtable podcast. I'm your host, Peter Zalewski from Condo Vultures. If you're tuning into this podcast, you're going to hear a conversation by current and former journalists talking about some of the biggest stories that occurred within the last week. We're going to cut through some of the fluff and give you this straight talk as to what's really going on in the industry. How do we come up with these stories? I handpick 6 articles. I send them off to our journalists and ask them to each read 2. I'm joined by 3 other journalists, and we're going to kick them around. Who is our target market? Well, we're a podcast for developers, for lenders, for investors, for sellers, for gadflies. So if you are looking for some kind of conversation at a cocktail party, who knows, maybe you'll come up with some pretty interesting ideas from our podcast and you can take it out there and release it into the world. Let me go ahead and introduce the members of the roundtable for this particular podcast. We have a gentleman who's a journalist for over 25 years. Right now, he's a publication marketing firm. He's based in Miami. His name is John Gruss. You can check out his website, which is grusspr.com, GRUSSPR.com. Name of his company is Gruss Communications, and you can get him on X, which is formerly Twitter, at John Gruss, JeanGruss. What's going on, Mr. Gruss?
Hey, Peter, glad to be on the Gadfly podcast.
It is a podcast specifically for gadflies. Those people are reading all of the normal information. We're not going to discuss the normal information. We're going to give you things to think about, and that's why we got somebody like John on the podcast. Who else do we have on the podcast? We have a gentleman who was a journalist for over 20 years, wrote about white-collar crime, did business stories, also did restaurant reviews. Right now, he does public relations and marketing. His name is John Fakler. If you want to reach John, you get him on X, which is formerly Twitter. Get him at JT Fakler, Fakler. What's going on, Mr. Fakler?
Hey, Peter, I'm glad to bring the voice of reason to the podcast. Glad to be here.
Yeah, voice of reason. That might be one way to put it. Mr. Fakler, quick question before we introduce our other roundtable member. Last week you made a comment that 3 in a row is a trend. I'm a Miami Dolphins fan. We're in Miami Dolphins territory for the NFL season. Biggest rival for the Miami Dolphins is the New York Jets. You've been going on and on about how great the Jets are. So last week you said 3 in a row is a trend, and memory serves me correct. The Jets lost their 3rd straight game on Sunday night against the Kansas City Chiefs, your New York Jets. Is that a trend? Is this foreshadowing for what the rest of the season is going to be like for the Jets? What say you, Mr. Fakler?
Well, I'm very happy that you pointed that out. Yes, it is a trend. It's a losing trend. And hopefully they'll break this trend next week against Denver.
True. Mr. Fakler, any truth to the speculation that anybody watching the podcast can see it, but anybody listening to the podcast will have to check it out on YouTube, that because the Jets lost 3 in a row, that's why you got the real fight haircut?
No, there's no connection there. Totally different situation. But I'm very glad that you pointed out the haircut. I'm thinking I'm looking kind of tight here today. So
Yeah, just want to squash those rumors out there. So fantastic. Let me introduce you to the fourth member of our podcast this particular week, fourth member of the Roundtable. She is a real estate reporter over at The Real Deal, been doing it for over a decade. It's nobody else but Lidia Dinkova. You want to reach her, you can get her on Twitter, or I guess formerly Twitter, which is now all called X, at Lidia Dinkova, which is LidiaDinkova. What's going on, Lidia?
Hey, Peter. Nice to be back.
It is great to have you, Lidia. We were talking before the podcast began about how during mango season in the hot, steamy summer, you are fortunate enough to have a few mango trees where you reside, and you were sharing them gladly with all of us. So anybody watching the podcast or listening who suddenly got some free mangoes from myself, from Mr. Fakler, even from Mr. Gruss, the real source of all the mangoes was actually Lidia. So Lidia, on behalf of everyone out there in the viewing public, thank you for your mangoes.
you were very good.
You're welcome. Glad you enjoy them. There's
They
going
were
to be more
spectacular.
next year. Yeah.
Lidia, any kind of guesstimate as to how many mangoes you actually distributed during this most recent mango season?
We stopped counting. It would have been too much work to count. There was too many.
Fantastic. That's great. Now, before we go ahead and get into our articles, let me just clean up sort of like the, the housekeeping types of ideas or issues for anybody listening to the podcast. So point number one, if you want to send us a comment, if you want to ask a question, if you want to criticize, get us on X, which is formerly Twitter. You can get us at Miami RRP, at Miami RRP. It stands for Miami Reporters Roundtable Podcast, at Miami RRP. It's not AARP, which is for people of a certain age group, including some of my colleagues on this podcast, myself not included, but at Miami RRP. So any comments, go ahead and hit us that way. The other point I want to throw out, and Lidia, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but we now are selling merchandise, and much like Marvel is able to sell merchandise, t-shirts and coffee mugs and other things like that, some of the superheroes that are featured in the movies, we're doing the same thing with our journalists. So any journalist who participates in the podcast, we view them as a superhero, and we're sending merchandise related to that. So we have throw pillows, we have welcome mats, we have t-shirts, much like John Gruss is wearing. We also have coffee mugs. And if you're very lucky, you can go ahead and splurge and get a shower curtain. We have one shower curtain that's up for sale. Mr. Fakler based on it. So first thing in the morning, Lidia, if you were to go into the shower, turn on the light, you see this nice big picture of Mr. Fakler. So something to watch for. Anybody who wants to check out our shop, as of next week, you're going to be able to get it at condovultures.com, at condovultures.com. In the meantime, you can get it at condovultures.creator, CREATOR, hyphen, that line in the middle, spray.com. Like, I can't wait for spring. Again, condovultures.creator, CREATOR, hyphen, spring. I can't wait for spring.com. We're not breaking for commercials this particular season. This is season 4. We simply have one sponsor. Who's that sponsor? It's going to be myself. It's going to be my brokerage, which is condovulturesrealty.com, condovulturesrealty.com. If you're looking for buy-side brokerage, you're looking for consulting, or you're looking for expert witness, anybody who's out there and you're looking for sort of a critical eye as to what's going on in the marketplace, reach out to us. Maybe somebody in our firm can help you. Again, condovulturesrealty.com. That being said, let's go ahead and begin our stories. John, we're going to go ahead and begin with a story that I sent over to you. It's coming out of the Wall Street Journal, and I'm going to read you the headline. I'll read you the first couple of graphs, and then after that, I want you to comment, John. So here we go. Wall Street Journal headline: the apartment market is hitting a construction lull. Subhead: higher interest rates, falling rents contribute to a decline in building starts. Now, first couple graphs, Sean, and then I want you to comment. Many of the cranes crowding skylines from Phoenix to Denver and Dallas will soon be down. They're likely to stay down for a long time. The number of new apartments starting development has fallen dramatically this year, a consequence of higher interest rates, declining rents, and what in some places looks like overbuilding. Apartment building starts fell to a seasonally adjusted annual rate of 334,000 units in August, marking a 41% decline from the pace seen the same month a year ago. According to the Census Bureau, an annual decline of this magnitude has happened only one other time since the subprime housing crisis, real estate data from Bright MLS said. And then here is a quote from a gentleman from an organization called the Institutional Property Advisors, which is a real estate advisory firm. Guy's name is Greg Willett. Here's his quote. We expect to see about 2 years of greatly reduced building. John, anyone who's listened to this podcast has heard you say that South Florida Business Journal and other publications have talked about 55,000 rentals in the pipeline in South Florida. So you've been waving the white flag, or you've been waving the warning signs, if you will, for quite some time. Now we got the Wall Street Journal saying we're looking at a slowdown in apartment construction and possibly some sort of change in rental rates. How does it feel to be right? And tell us where we go from here.
Well, I don't think South Florida developers got the memo, because not a week goes by without a new apartment construction project getting underway, it seems. So I don't know if we're just in a sort of a bubble, but this is the story of Florida. We don't do things halfway. We go all out. It's boom or bust. Unfortunately, there's going to be a tsunami of new apartments in South Florida. And I think we're definitely in an overbuilding mode. How many of those are going to get converted to condos? I don't know. It's going to be a good question. There's going to be, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, John, so for anybody in the audience who's wondering how you create a condo, what's the difference between a condo and a rental? Real simple. It's a piece of paperwork. Basically, you file something called a declaration of condominium. You send it off to the, I think it's the Bureau of Condominium. Basically, the state of Florida, you send it to them. They go ahead to give you approval. It's about 6 months later, ballpark 150, 200 grand and legal work. 6 months later, you get the notification. That notification is sent to the property appraiser in whatever county the property is located. And then folio numbers. The tax ID is issued for every individual unit within that apartment building. So it's just paperwork. There's nothing more like that. The same way you can create a condo, you can terminate a condo. So what you're alluding to, we got all these rentals. And if the rental market gets soft, but we don't have enough supply of those properties that are for sale. Again, same building, same unit. The only difference is the paperwork and ultimately a folio number where tax collected off of. John, what would you anticipate? Do you think that this all this rental buildup at cheap costs originally could then be converted into condos, and all of a sudden we deal with supposedly a surplus of rentals, at least in South Florida?
Well, if the numbers don't work out for developers, they're gonna shift gears. That's happened before. We've seen it, throughout Florida history, recent history, last 20, 30 years. And it's just a repeat of the typical cycle of overbuilding that we have in Florida. It seems to be, just part of the real estate landscape. And it's what we go through every 10, 15 years. And, there's been, a lot of easy money for developers to build these apartments, and the numbers, especially in the last few years with COVID, the population forecast, population boom has been, stratospheric. And so apartment developers have come here and they're all building all at once. And so what typically happens is if you have like economic slowdown, you're going to have a glut of apartments. And that's certainly a scenario that could easily play out here.
And John, just one quick follow-up question to that. We're recording this podcast on a Tuesday. It'll be coming out on Friday. And today the stock market was down. I think that, what was it? The Dow was down 500 points. And we saw the 10-year treasury move from last week. It was about 4.55. Now it's somewhere in the ballpark of 4.75 or so. Add 3 points for a mortgage rate. John, how much is rising interest rates, do you think, going to also contribute to a slowdown, possibly in some of the new construction that many people have gotten accustomed to over the last few years?
Yeah, and certainly in commercial construction, and then we're gonna see those rates affect projects and how they pencil out, because they just won't. And so and I'm sure we'll talk about that in some of the stories that we've got in the lineup today.
So what story do we have in the lineup today? We have a story that was written by Lidia Dinkova. This is story number 2. Lydia, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read you the headline, and I'm going to read you the first couple graphs from a piece you wrote in The Real Deal. Then I'll ask you to provide any kind of insight you can. You wrote the story. You might not feel comfortable commenting, but any kind of insight you can offer, we would appreciate. So again, coming from the Real Deal, Lidia, this is your piece. Headline: Record deal. Monarch Tourmaline buying 801 Brickell for roughly $250 million. Subhead: Unfazed by national CRE trends, which is commercial real estate trends. Nuveen Real Estate is selling 28-story building that's over 90% leased. In the first couple of graphs, Lidia, Monarch Alternative Capital and Tourmaline Capital Partners are buying the 801 Brickell office tower in Miami for about $250 million. The Real Deal has learned. If the deal closes at this price, it would mark a record for a South Florida office investment this year. Monarch and Tourmaline are buying a 28-story building at 801 Brickell Avenue in Miami from Nuveen Real Estate, according to sources who put the price in the mid $200 million range. The deal is expected to close late this week or early next week. Adam Spies and Marcelo Folusto of Newark, along with Mike Davis and Dominic Montezemi of Cushman & Wakefield, are representing the seller. And the story goes on to say, Spies and Montezemi declined comment, and Davis didn't return any request for comment. Completed in 1984, the building spanned 695,000 square feet, with roughly 415,000 square feet of that being offices. Property records show Nuveen, which is an investment arm of the Teachers Insurance and Annuities Association of America, better known as TIAA, had paid $80.3 million for the building in 2002. Boy, that's a hell of a pop in terms of pricing, Lidia. And also, too, why the hell would you pay record price for an office tower if supposedly nobody wants to go to the office anymore and they get to work from home? So, Lidia, can you provide some insight into that?
I sure can. So, yeah, it is a record pricing, but when I was speaking with sources for the story, they cautioned this as saying this is a record pricing, quote unquote, unfortunately, or quote unquote, sadly, because it's a record pricing for this year, given the high interest rates, but it's not beating last year's record. And in fact, there is a suspicion that it may be record, not just for South Florida for this year, but for like an investment sale in like major, basically all over the US. If we weed out things like owner occupier buyer,
Yep.
and foreclosures of big loans, there's a lot of talk that this is actually going to be the biggest one. And again, sadly, because this breaks down to like the low $600 a square foot just for the office space, that's not that high. Other things going on. It's my understanding that Nuveen had that on the market off and on for quite some time. So it was just like many of the other office deals that managed to close this year. This one took a while. And this has been a ubiquitous story with all the office sales in South Florida. You see them go on the market, go off, then something happens. They drag on for a while because usually buyers have to renegotiate financing. So yes, record deal, but with the understanding that it's a record deal for this year, considering that the pricing has been suppressed across the board this year.
Lidia, when you were reporting out the piece, I guess what I'm wondering is, why buy now? I know why you would want to sell now, but why buy now? Is it strictly driven by price? Is it driven by the fact that the story says 90% occupancy? Is it driven by the fact of the location? Why would somebody want to buy in a market which is still undetermined yet as to how many days a week people will be actually going into the office? Whether they're going to the office at all? Are we moving away from the Zoom generation or the Zoom era? Remember, Zoom called a lot of their employees back to the office. Only a few days a week. So can you just sort of answer that big picture question? Why would somebody want to buy office now? Did anybody provide any kind of insight?
So not particularly for this story, but in like asking this question for any other commercial real estate deal, two things have come up as the answer. And the Monarch and Tourmaline deal for 801 Brickell hasn't closed yet, so I don't know about their financing, but sources did say it's favorable terms with 60% loan to cost, so not a very high leverage. So generally, the buyers out there in the market who would be able to buy and are buying now would be they would have the equity and they would have the closed discretionary funds and they would have more cash on hand. They wouldn't be exposed that much to a loan. And generally, if they are, they would tag a lender who would offer more favorable terms than a bank. the second point and the fact that we are exposed to work from home and lots of tenants like deciding to shave off a little bit of their footprint. Yes, that's true. Uh, but that just also varies on a case by case. It is in the end of the day, it is still Brickell, not downtown San Francisco. And there were companies that moved here for financial firms, tech firms in the past 3 years. So I guess if you're going to bet on an office market right now and you can afford to, you might as well just do it here as opposed to like somewhere else where the climate is much worse.
Wow. Interesting. So story number 3, Mr. Fakler, John Fakler, we're going to go to you with story number 3. This is coming out of CBS News Miami. I will read you the headline in the first couple graphs, Mr. Fakler, that I'm going to ask you to comment. Condo Association for Caribbean Isles Villas in Miami-Dade, under investigation for neglect and handling of funds. And here we go, Mr. Fakler, first couple graphs. A community in disrepair demands change. The board president of Caribbean Isles Villas, which is a condo community, responded to those concerns. At the same time, Miami-Dade police confirmed to CBS News Miami, its Economic Crimes Bureau, is investigating the association's handling of funds. Photos sent by residents to CBS News Miami revealed bugs crawling up the walls and ceilings. Another unit photo showed a cracked ceiling and what appears to be mold or mildew. Our cameras captured cardboard covering silk drywall in a bedroom from a third different unit that Luis Nunez happens to own and rent. And here's a quote from Mr. Nunez. 2 months since it's been reported. Even the water's coming down as we speak. And Mr. Nunez owns and rents multiple condos in the Caribbean Isles Villa in Homestead. He listens as one of his renters, pleads for repairs. She speaks with him from behind our camera, fearful of retaliation from the association. My biggest priority is all of us getting sick and not what I want. So showed Nunez's tenant from that unit, the one who doesn't want to be named. The sheets keep getting wet. I have to dry them constantly. There's nothing I can do, explained Nunez. You have to repair the roof, which the association owns. Even if I do it on my own, I risk being sued because I have no right to touch that. Mr. Fakler, we keep talking about stories where associations basically are being accused of stealing money. Cops are arresting members of associations for a variety of different topics. Now we have an example of maybe some of the money not being used to maintain an actual building. What do you make of this story? Am I getting this wrong, or does it seem like we got one of these stories like every other week?
Well, we talked earlier, Peter, about trends, and I thought about this as well with this. This is not it's an old story. It's not, alleged corruption with associations or actual corruption. But this is interesting because I'm seeing a trend in reporting of these. And what I'm seeing also is outright thuggery, where residents are being intimidated to not speak up, not talk to the media. There's a real fear factor in the last 2 stories that we talked about, including this one.
Yes.
Where, and that's something that I haven't seen before. At least I haven't seen it reported. And this is now, I think, back-to-back weeks of this. So, that's something that it really begs to be watched real closely. A real important takeaway I took from the story, Peter.
Yep.
Is that the association, okay, basically none of the for the work that was supposed to be done, none of the permits that were pulled by the city had to do with the roof. They had to do with other work. And the roof is really the main and most expensive project to be done. And this is over a period of 3 years, from 2020 to current, that no roof permits were pulled. So, there's a lot of fishy stuff going on here. Very interesting takeaway, though, I thought, because these residents were very upset. They don't know, they haven't seen any work done. They don't know where their money's going.
Yes.
And what's happening is they form their own association within an association almost, where they've gotten together over 100 owners. And this week they're going to the board meeting and they're going to try to vote in 3 of their own people. And which is interesting. It's like an attempted coup d'etat in effect. So to get their, get to the bottom of where their money's going. I think it's kind of interesting. I wonder if that's going to be something in the future people will have to do if they can't as we all know, these are private companies. They don't have to give their financials. It's not a public company, which does have to give their financials. So, effectively, it's operating as a private company. But in the future, this may be a power grab and a way to get things settled when they are unsettled, so to speak.
And what's interesting about that, Mr. Fakler, is if you're going in and you're buying a unit in a condominium and you want to get any kind of information, typically the only way you can get the information is once you sign a contract, and then the seller, if you're actually purchasing it, they actually have to share it with you, because an association will not share it openly. Now, because of the collapse of Champlain Tower South, there was some sort of movement, I read legislation that would allow people to be able to get their hands on certain information. But many properties will not share information openly, because ultimately they all work on the sell side, and putting out that information and having people understand what's really going on is going to have a dramatic impact, in theory, as to what a place trades for. Because those buildings which are well run, everyone's going to want to go in there, and then the maintenance will simply reflect that. In those buildings, which can be problematic, they don't want the information out there because everybody knows that's a building you need to dump. And those sellers want to cut bait. They want to be the wrecks jumping off the sinking ship before anybody sort of figures out. John or Lidia, either of you have any kind of comment just about what's available and what's a buyer to do if they might be stepping into a building? They think they got a great price. They can't necessarily see what's going on with the board of directors. And lo and behold, they find themselves in a situation like what Mr. Fakler was just discussing.
Yeah, it's a real shame that in the legislation that followed the Champlain Tower collapse, that they didn't make it into law that HOAs have to publicly disclose their financials, because then you'd see exactly the malfeasance, and you could actually see if they're maintaining the property or not, and what's happening with the money.
Absolutely.
And it's a real shame, because if you're a buyer, I mean, that's something you would want to know. And I mean, this is just sort of basic, and HOAs are just, rife with corruption and embezzlements. And I mean, it's just, they're just little criminal enterprises. Right? I look at them.
Exactly.
They're just opportunities for people to steal, basically. Because there's no disclosure. And if you had actually applied some of the sunshine laws to HOA disclosures, HOA financial disclosures, maybe you'd have a little bit of, of ethics and some cleanup there.
Yeah.
It's a great point. Lidia, would you like to add anything before we go on to the next story?
Yeah, and I agree with what John and John said. And I think, yes, the legislation following Champlain, but earlier this year, I think Catherine Fernandez Rondo and I think one of the state representatives tried to strengthen the Condominium Act and the HOA state statute, and I think that got watered down. They tried to do it following the hammocks issue in West Kendall, where they so far uncovered roughly $3 million was misappropriated, but that it could be more. But I believe that the bills were completely watered down. All protections for condo associations were taken out, and the remaining protections that were in the bill for the homeowners associations were very much lowered down. Things like appointing a records custodian, that was taken out. When you file a complaint with the state, they would immediately have to forward it to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. If you're alleging any crime, they would have a short time frame for reviewing it. So that's another aspect of it. They just refuse to strengthen the law.
Which is unfortunate, but it is something that any buyer out there ought to be well aware of. And I will tell you, I'll just remind you, no deal is that good unless there's some sort of catch to it. So if you're out there looking for a condo and you find a great price, don't think you're smarter than the seller. You might want to take a look at the condo association, because chances are you might be getting set up and there might be some special assessment or some situation like this coming down the pipe. And it's not your lucky day. It might be your unlucky day. So, but that is life in South Florida condo market. So we're going to go on with story number 4. Jean, we're going to go to you with story number 4. This is coming out of South Florida Business Journal. I'll read you the headline, first couple graphs. Insurance costs weigh down development. Subhead, builders say surge could lead to slowdown. First couple graphs, a dramatic increase in property insurance rates this year has helped for a slowdown in real estate sales and development in South Florida, and its situation that's not expected to improve anytime soon. According to industry experts, commercial property insurance rates have spiked from 25 to 100% over the last year, depending on the property type and location. Deductibles are also higher in most cases. Combined with rising interest rates, that has greatly increased the carrying cost of buying commercial real estate. For developers, the triple whammy of expensive builders risk insurance, higher interest rates, and elevated construction prices can make some projects simply too costly to pursue. Mr. Gruss, this is like your victory lap. You've been talking about how insurance prices have gone up and how it was going to have an impact on construction costs. Just like you were talking about the tsunami of rentals that were coming, then lo and behold, the Wall Street Journal writes about it. You're talking about commercial insurance costs going up and how it's probably going to slow down that industry. You want to take another victory lap, or why don't you tell us what's coming next?
Well, I mean, I guess I'm a little surprised that people are surprised that this was coming. I mean, we all know this was coming. I mean, this has been widely reported by Lidia and all her colleagues for months, maybe years. This insurance story has been going on for years, and it's kind of come to a head. The other thing is, I will note that the smart developers, the smart landlords, are the ones that charge triple net leases to their tenants, because then the tenants have to pay for the cost of insurance and taxes and common area maintenance. And all you do is you pay rent to the landlord, and it is your responsibility as a tenant to pay for insurance and taxes and common area maintenance. So those so-called triple net leases are actually probably helping landlords now as those costs surge. But at the same time, they can't raise the rents because those costs are getting really so high that landlords really can't afford to really spike rents for fear of losing tenants. Because I think some tenants are they may be skating by with minimal profits, and those extra expenses are just a thing to like make them cancel their leases. So we may see vacancies rise as a result. Particularly I'm thinking like retail tenants, for example, those that are like maybe experiencing slowdowns. It's going to be a retail shakeout if the U.S. consumer starts to falter a little bit. And I think that's going to be, we're going to have to watch that.
So Lidia Dinkova, we're going to go to you with story number 5. This is coming out of The Real Deal. This is a piece that you wrote. I'll read you the headline and read you the first couple graphs. Then I want you to comment. So, headline: after the gold rush, sublease availability grows as Miami's financial and tech firms rethink needs. Subhead: industries once had brokers giddy, but now have 240,000 square feet back on the market. And here we go. First couple graphs. Miami-Dade County became a magnet for new-to-market firms from late 2020 to early last year. As companies gobbled up office space, real estate circles were especially giddy over 2 industries: financial services and tech. Once billionaire Ken Griffin moved to Citadel and Citadel Securities headquarters to Miami, the city's fate as a mecca for financial firms seemed sealed. And the tech firm influx to the city led to some rechristen Miami as the Silicon Valley of the South. Yet, financial and tech firms are now the top contributors to the sublease availability in Miami-Dade County. According to a new CBRE report, financial service companies have 128,000 square feet of office space up for sublease, and tech and telecommunication firms have 112,000 square feet, according to Lisette Edelman, who worked on the report. This accounts for about 37 and 34% of the share, respectively, of the county's almost 400,000 square feet available subleasable space, according to the CBRE data. So Lidia, am I hearing that just like we heard a lot about FTX and we heard about crypto and the crypto bros, that Miami was going to be the mecca and they were all coming here and they were going to lease office space? Is this another example of some of the hot button industries that moved here during the pandemic? We're basically packing their stuff and leaving, and everything we were promised and everything we dreamed of isn't actually going to come through to fruition, and it might actually be a nightmare.
So I do think some of the tech firms, there is at least one that packed up its stuff and left back to San Francisco. But in subsequent like reporting and speaking with sources regarding financial firms, a lot of people think that they're not going to leave, but overall, the hype that we heard from late 2020, 2021 about the financial firm influx, well, the reality check is that there is an uh, finite amount of financial firms out there, and there's a finite amount of financial firms out there who want to move to South Florida, and it's dried up. It's done. Like, so we just had like what was supposed to be 10 years of growth condensed into like a year and a half of growth. So we saw this initial spike. It really got everybody getting excited. But now, first of all, they didn't take out that big of an office in South Florida. They tend to have a bigger footprint in places like New York and Chicago. South Florida is more like for the executives trying to make connections down here and so forth. So they need much smaller space. And two, they are also impacted by work from home. So they are, wary of signing long-term leases and are in effect putting some of their space also that they've taken out back on the market, contributing to our sublease availability.
Now, Lidia, to follow up on more information coming out of your piece, while Miami-Dade County experienced a drop in sublease availability by 107,000 square feet in the past year, Broward County, which is where Fort Lauderdale is located, saw it increase by 85,000 square feet. A comparison between CBRE's report from September last year and this year shows Palm Beach experienced the biggest sublease availability growth from 254,000 square feet on the market. Lidia, what could you tell us about Broward and Palm Beach County, and how do they compare to maybe what we've seen in Miami-Dade County?
So the consensus out there is that Fort Lauderdale was, I guess, like trailed Miami and West Palm Beach in terms of like getting all these new companies and the new office buildings and so on. So maybe it's going to be Fort Lauderdale's turn eventually sometime in the future. West Palm Beach obviously is the next big thing after Miami and obviously Steve Ross of related companies is building numerous office buildings there. Interesting. I feel like the overall sublease availability that came back on the market in Palm Beach County, a lot of it probably has to do with submarkets. Like it says, Boca Raton. There's the big Boca Innovation Campus, the former IBM campus there. A lot of tenants, I've heard from brokers that they're having a really hard time filling up some of the bigger buildings out there. And that's again, because a lot of, let's say for the financial firms, when they move down here, again, they move their executives, they keep the back office tenants like accounting and so on, who take big square footage. They stay in New York and Chicago, but it's exactly these back office tenants who would take up a lot of those vacant buildings that are sitting vacant in Boca, but they're just not moving that particular division here.
Interesting. John, I want to ask you a question. You wrote about banking for quite some time. Some of your clients in your public relations marketing firm are related to the banking or the financial sector. John, if we're seeing leasable space come available before the arrival of, let's call it AI, generative AI, what would you anticipate? What do you think AI and the adoption by the financial industry could have on financial institutions? And ultimately, what could that translate to in terms of office space needs down here in the Tri-County, South Florida region?
Yeah, a lot of the more sort of more menial tasks would be handled by AI, and so perhaps you might not have as big a head count. But what's interesting to me on the sublease space is that I'm wondering, 400,000 square feet. I mean, the South Florida office market is millions and millions of square feet. So I guess as a percentage of the total space, the sublease space, at least initially now, while it may be increasing, it doesn't seem like a gigantic amount. I remember during the commercial real estate downturn, the last one, we had like vast amount of commercial sublease space, on top of vacancies. So I don't know, Lidia, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that is true. It's not a tremendous amount out of the overall market, but nevertheless, uh, it's important to keep track of this stuff, because we just want to see really how things are doing instead of relying on the constant hype we hear from brokers and developers that things are great. So
Yeah.
it is interesting in the end of the day that sublease has grew despite all the chatter and giddiness that where the Silicon Valley of the South and West Palm is the what is it, the Wall Street of the South.
The Wall Street of the South. We've been hearing that a long time. We also heard a lot about Bitcoin. We heard about Miami coin. We heard about the crypto bros. So great article, Lydia. Story number 6, we're going to go to Mr. Fakler, John Fakler. This is a piece that's coming out of the Florida Bulldog, this publication that's it's headed by Dan Christensen, a longtime journalist down here, investigative reporter. The piece is actually written by a guy called Bob Norman. Anybody knows the longtime journalist down here, Bob Norman. He actually wrote this piece. And Mr. Fakler, before I read you the headline in the first couple graphs, let me just tell you, we're recording this podcast on a Tuesday. This is actually the day that the founder of FTX, which is a Bitcoin exchange, a cryptocurrency exchange, FTX also had its name on the American Airlines Arena, where the Miami Heat plays, became the FTX Arena. It's now called the Kaseya Center. This is the day of the beginning of his trial for a variety of different topics related to some sort of financial indiscretions, if you will. So that's sort of the backdrop, Mr. Fakler. Before I read you the headline, first couple graphs coming out of the Florida Bulldog. Here we go. Key co-conspirator in billion-dollar Rothstein Ponzi scheme, now a public official in South Florida. Now, for anybody who doesn't know, last go around when the real estate market crashed down here in South Florida, there were 2 major Ponzi schemes. One got taken down in Broward County. One got taken down in Miami-Dade County. The one in Broward County, where Fort Lauderdale was, that one was called the Rothstein Ponzi scheme. It had to do with a factoring company, a law firm that was basically selling rights to factoring contracts that were out there. So I'm going to continue on, Mr. Fakler. Then I want you to provide some insight. So as I said with the headline, key co-conspirator in billion-dollar Rothstein Ponzi scheme, now a public official in South Florida. First couple graphs. As an appointed member of Surfside's Planning and Zoning Board, anybody doesn't remember, Surfside is a city where the tower collapsed, the Champlain Tower South. It's located between just north of Miami Beach and just south of Bell Harbor in Sunny Isles Beach on the Barrier Island in Miami-Dade County. As an appointed member of Surfside's Planning and Zoning Board, Michael Zalewski is trusted to pass judgment on some of the most important issues involving the town. And as head of Florida acquisitions for the Kushner companies, Zalewski makes decisions involving hundreds of $millions worth of developments for former first son-in-law Jared Kushner family business. Story goes on to say, we're very proud to have Michael Kushner CEO Laurent Morali told the Florida Bulldog. He does a great job for our company. We regard him as one of the most brilliant people in the industry. That's kind of how we feel about Michael. But what about Zalewski's notorious past as the convicted felon involved with the largest Ponzi scheme in Florida's history? And then we have a quote coming from Morelli, who is the CEO of Kushner's development company. Anyone who makes a mistake, they pay a price, Morelli said. They get sentenced. They go out of prison, and once they get out, they start from scratch. I believe in the good of people. However, the answer doesn't cut it with former Surfside Commissioner Elena Salhauser, beginning with Morelli's use of the word mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was a continuous fraud, said the former commissioner. It was a deliberate fraud that was perpetuated, and had he never been caught, he never would have been sorry for what he was continuing to do. Mr. Fakler, what do you make of the fact that this gentleman who got taken down roughly a little bit over a decade ago during the Great Recession, which followed a tremendous run up in real estate prices, is now sitting on a planning advisory board for the city of Surfside, which made international headlines when a tower collapsed? There were 100 people died and $1 billion settlement was put out, and the federal government or a federal agency is now investigating how this tower could simply collapse. What do you make of the fact that we got a convicted felon sitting on that planning and zoning board, according to the Florida Bulldog?
Well, first I wanted to welcome our viewers to Fraud Heaven. Welcome. Here's what I don't understand, and really it goes to the heart of your question. If you're filling out an application to work at McDonald's, one of the first questions they ask you is, do you have a criminal history? Right? I mean, it's very common. It's on all job applications, no matter how low or high. How is it even possible that he was brought on with a criminal history. For a position like that, that's so sensitive, particularly the fact that it's on this site where the building collapsed, all these people died, and he gets his particular position as well as a voting position. So he actually has control over the votes on this. Now, ultimately this passed. It was approved. This particular high rise. So I just don't understand it. I mean, the one common thread I could think about through this whole story, he among the investors he scammed included temple members, the members of the temple. I don't have the name in front of me of the temple he belonged to. And it's funny because the reporter went back to them and said, how what do you think about this? And they were like all forgiving, like, oh, it wasn't a big deal, even though they got scammed out of God knows how much money. But, the common thread here is that, by the way, this temple, the Kushners, meaning the president's daughter and son-in-law,
Former
also belong to
president.
this.
Former president,
Excuse me. They also belong to this temple. So, that's one common thread through this. I'm just wondering, was there some glad handing going on? I'm not making any allegations, but, how is it that he was able to sort of sneak into this position? And, yet, the first thing you think about is all its connections to the Kushners. And obviously he's got the top job, I believe, as far as the, on the real estate side of the Florida, the Kushner company. So he's, he literally runs the Florida operation. So, I just,
let me let a little bit more insight, and then I'll ask any of you to comment. So according to the story, kept secret was the fact that Rothstein, and this is a gentleman who's running the Ponzi scheme, the Rothstein Ponzi scheme, he was selling legal settlements to mostly wealthy investors, including shady New York hedge funds. He promised large returns on the investments that he paid out until the money ran out in November of 2009. Rothstein then fled to Morocco with the last $17 million, but then returned to surrender to the FBI and cooperate with federal prosecutors. He explained that all the settlement agreements he sold and what was a $1.2 billion with a B billion-dollar Ponzi scheme was all fake. He and 28 co-defendants, including Safaransky, would all be sentenced to prison. In the case, Rothstein himself, 50 years in prison. Mr. Fakler, Jean, or Lidia, the guy went to prison. He spent his time. People ought to have a second chance. The question is not that they get a second chance. The question is, should a gentleman like this be put in a position where he can make decisions on which building go forward and which buildings don't, especially given what's recently happened down here in South Florida in terms of politicians, elected officials, and accusations by local, state, and federal bodies that maybe there's a little quid pro quo going on in terms of, we'll do this if you pay us that. What say any or all of you?
In terms of quid pro quo and my opinions on that, I'm going to steer clear of that since we are reporting on the MAC project on the site and so on. I guess like the first questions that pop into my head when I read this is, honestly, I'm wondering what is the town's application process to vet somebody who is applying for a volunteer position on the planning and zoning board. And then I'm wondering what the town administrators and elected officials to talk about after they saw the story run. Was there any reaction? Because A, it could have been an omission and they just don't have appropriate vetting processes that look at these things. And B, even if that's the case, are they taking any steps to address this issue or discuss this issue? Or is it just going to be something that you just kind of like ignore and continue, which would be exactly, if that happens, when it would definitely raise more questions and look a little bit more suspicious.
Lily makes a great point. There should be a process. I guess my point is that there should be a process in place for hiring like this. And now they're going to have to go back and sort of, answer the questions and do it the appropriate way. Whereas, here it looks like it was a major oversight as far as the hiring process.
Well, it was an appointment process, Mr. Fakler.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Appointment to the surf side, but it was a hiring by the private sector company.
Exactly.
John, any thoughts, any comments?
I mean, this is such a Florida story.
Absolutely.
Only in Florida would this kind of stuff happen.
Only in Florida.
It's almost not shocking.
Yeah, I know. Exactly.
Well, what is shocking is that our podcast is over. I want to go ahead and I want to thank John Gruss. He's a journalist for over 25 years. Right now has a public relations and marketing firm called Gruss Communications. You can check out his website at grusspr.com, GRUSSPR.com. You can also get him on X, which is formerly Twitter. Get him at Jean, Jean Gruss, Gruss. Also want to thank John Fakler. John was a journalist for over 20 years, wrote about white-collar crime, did business stories, also did his restaurant reviews. You need to go ahead and do a clip search. Check out some of those reviews on the various restaurants Mr. Fakler used to write about. And right now he does public relations and marketing. If you want to reach out to John Fakler, you get him on Twitter at JT Fakler, Fakler. Also want to thank Lidia Dinkova. Lidia is a journalist, a real estate reporter over at the Real Deal down here in Miami. She's been doing over a decade. You want to get Lidia on X, which is formerly Twitter. Get her at Lidia, Lidia, Dinkova, Dinkova. And I'm Peter Zalewski of Condo Vultures. If you have any comments for us, you have any questions, get us on X, which is formerly Twitter. Get us at Miami RRP, which stands for Miami Reporters Roundtable Podcast. And let me remind you, if you do want to check out any of our merchandise, very soon you can go to condovultures.com, where you can pick up any of the merchandise we're selling, where you can get a mug, you get a t-shirt, you can get a shower curtain with Mr. Fakler on it. So I'd encourage you to go check it out and meet some of our superheroes. Until next time, I hope everybody takes care of themselves and we'll catch up soon. Remember, our podcast comes out every Friday. Be sure to like, be sure to subscribe. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, ciao, ciao.
It's a simple formula, and it works. Buy low, sell high. We're Condo Vultures, and when it comes to your real estate, we help you buy low. At Condo Vultures, we represent the buyer, and now's the time to buy. Log on to condovultures.com for more information. Condovultures.com. And remember, before you sell high, you have to buy low. Featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, 60 Minutes, and Time Magazine. Condo Vultures Realty, a licensed Florida real estate brokerage capitalizing on the condo correction since 2006.
This is Peter Zalewski of the Condo Vultures podcast. Before I started doing these podcasts, I was in the business of being a licensed real estate broker, a contributing columnist for the Miami Herald, as well as the Miami Real Deal, but also extra witness work in consulting. So if you are looking for an expert witness, or if you're looking for consulting services, a straight talk perspective as to what's going on in a particular marketplace, a building, or what happened previously, for whatever your situation is, whether you are an attorney, whether you are a institutional fund looking to invest, or whether you're a lender who's trying to come up with some sort of strategy and approach for your lending committee going forward, I just might be able to help you. To get a hold of me, please reach out to Peter at condovultures.com. That's Peter at condovultures.com, or give me a call to the office at 305-865-5859, 305-865-5859.